80 to 85% of homicide victims are known by their killers or known to their killers, or however you want to phrase it. So this was, domestic violence, intimate partner assault, homicide. It was statutory rape. I'm not sure exactly how California laws work. If he was 17 and she was, 13, they're both minors then. But I think there's an age discrepancy that can still be charged. So, like, one of the charges is ongoing sexual assault on the part of Burke against Celeste. So that clearly is a factor there. So yeah, all these factors will be looked into, and but victimology will be important. But part of her victimology is being in an intimate relationship, arguably an illegal relationship, strictly because of the age factors with this young man. Whether the parents gave her the kind of freedom to go with him. I mean, look, Elvis Presley was in his 20s when he met up with Priscilla, forget her name before she was married, in Germany when he was in the service. And he went to her parents and asked, hey, could she move back to, I guess it was Memphis with him after he got out. So older, and I mean, Jerry Lee Lewis, another entertainer, he married his 13-year-old cousin when he was like 20, 23, 24. So these kind of things happened before with entertainers, but they didn't wind up chopped up inside the trunk of a car. And as awful as that sounds. So yeah, intimate relationship, murder. They could have been the same age. She could have been older than him. They both could have been adults. The most serious part of the crime, of course, is her murder. But, she was also victimized. She was groomed, no doubt. And she became very vulnerable. And of course, at 18, he's not ready to settle down. Sounds like he was having other relationships with women. Celeste got upset, was threatening to expose him. And that's how this all.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Jim Fitzgerald, a.k.a. Fitz. Fitz, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Ray. I hope you are too. We're here to discuss someone, a musician, who is not on my playlist. I'm not sure about yours, but this guy got himself into some problems in Southern California involving a murder of a woman named Celeste Hernandez. But Ray, why don't you walk us through a little bit about the suspect and what's going on right now with him?
Well, the case involves a singer named D4VD. His real name is David Anthony Burke, and it's in reference to a 14-year-old girl named Celeste Rivas Hernandez. It's one of the highest profile homicide investigations in Los Angeles in recent years because it has a combination of allegations in several different things: child sex abuse, murder, dismemberment, an alleged attempt to conceal the crime to protect the rapidly growing music career. It's important for our audience to remember, Jim, that Burke has pled not guilty in court, and the allegations have not been proven to this point. Now, we look at a timeline of this investigation, and it started back in 2023. And according to prosecutors, and they've done a press release, and we're going to include that on our website. I suggest that to our audience, that you go and look at that press release. It provides a lot of information. We're just going to skim over things. But according to prosecutors, Burke allegedly began a sexual relationship with Celeste when she was 13 years old, while he was an emerging recording artist. And prosecutors contended the relationship continued into 2025. And Burke has not admitted to any of these allegations to this point, Jim.
Yeah, their relationship actually started when she was 11 and he was 16 or 17. And the sexual relationship seemingly started when she was 13. Not long thereafter, there's text messages been presented in court last week that they actually were talking about her getting an abortion because she was pregnant, and she apparently did. One of the text messages included him asking her, "Are you sure it's my baby?" To which she assured him that it was. And then it seems things sort of going south. He was perhaps hooking up with other women. Celeste found out about this, was challenging him, and she went missing a few times, and her family reported her missing. But the last time was in April of 25, they reported her missing, and she was never seen alive again until she was found dismembered and in pretty bad physical shape, deceased in the trunk of Burke's Tesla. And that's what we're talking about now. Last week, and again, to remind everyone, last week in LA, there was a preliminary hearing. That's not the trial determining innocence or guilt or acquittal, what have you. This is just where the prosecutor puts up, as they say, a prima facie case, the first facts, the basic facts in front of a judge and no jury in an attempt to determine whether this case is able to go trial. We talked about this a few weeks ago with the killer of Charlie Kirk and that preliminary hearing in Utah. Excuse me. So that's where we are right now. The preliminary hearing will actually continue this coming week. And so far, there's been a lot of information made available to the public through this preliminary hearing.
And Jim, the prosecutors are alleging that the young woman Celeste was killed on or about April 23rd, 2025. Their theory, what they put out in this hearing, is that she threatened to expose the relationship, which created a motive for Burke to silence her in order to protect his music career. And he had lucrative recording contracts. They have alleged special circumstances that included financial gain and the murder of a witness. Now, what they found in their investigation, that in the summer of 25, that Burke purchased certain items. And this came out in the preliminary hearing: chainsaws, a shovel, body bags, an inflatable pool, and other cleaning supplies. And the thing is, he used his own credit card or accounts to purchase these items. They said that these items that were purchased, is what they said in the preliminary hearing, these things that were purchased was part of the planning and disposing of the body. The defense, in reference to this, disputed the significance of any of these purchases, which I found ironic.
And unless Burke was starting his own landscaping business or a house cleaning business,
correct.
Excuse me, this evidence is very bad for him, especially on his own credit card. And I'm sure they go back and do some surveillance video at a Home Depot or a Lowe's. They're going to find, video of him or someone in his entourage, we'll call it. These guys didn't travel alone. They didn't perform alone. They had musicians, they had sound people, they had, all kinds of people working on these concerts and these tours are going on, roadies, whatever. And, we don't know for fact, again, not guilty till proven innocent, innocent until proven guilty, I should say.
True.
Some people look at the other way around. But anyway, so there's a lot, more that has to come into this case. But clearly Burke is at the forefront. He's at the center of all this. Whether there are co-conspirators or not, that will be determined later on. But there seems to be enough evidence. He also bought a burn box, which is obviously a box you can put items inside and burn them. And I guess that the fire won't spread, whatever, around the house or wherever you're doing the burning. But that was unused. And I guess instead the body parts of Hernandez were put in the Tesla, which was registered to Burke. It was impounded. It sat for months in an LA impoundment yard until one of the workers there smelled something not too friendly to the olfactory sense. And they wound up opening, thinking Tesla's the trunks in the front. They opened it up and what they saw were the remains, physical remains. And before long, the police were called, the crime scene folks, eventually an autopsy, and it was in fact determined to be Celeste Hernandez. It looked like her limbs had been severed. The coroner's office couldn't tell due to the decomposition level. We're not going to get too graphic here, but they couldn't tell exactly how the limbs were cut off or removed, but they were. There was a chainsaw. I believe at least one of the three chainsaws had blood on it, and I believe it was blood of Hernandez that DNA could come up with. So, we talked about the evidence in the Charlie Kirk killer case that was presented in Utah, a complete different case, of course, not related at all, but that case had a lot of evidence to it, forensics, surveillance, DNA, eyewitness. We don't have any eyewitness testimony in this case yet of the murder of Hernandez, but I have a feeling, his roadies and other people involved in his group will have some information about this, and they will be told either you're going to be charged or you're going to give us the information and you're going to testify in court, and we'll see where that winds up going. But
Jim,
doesn't look good for
Jim,
this guy right now.
just for our audience's edifice here, what Jim's talking about occurred in September 2025. So it's almost a year now since this occurred. And what Jim said reminds me of another case that I had a chance to look into. It happened out of Maine on New Year's Day, where a husband killed his wife. And he went to Home Depot and purchased a lot of items in Home Depot and did some searches on the internet of how to dispose of a body. And he tried the same things to do that are occurring here. And if this individual purchased a chainsaw at Home Depot and they know that, they're going to be able to trace that back to his account, his credit card account, to almost the same exact chainsaw and other items. Now, since that time, between September 2025 and April of this year, the LAPD has done a lot of work. They searched Burke's residence. They seized all of his electronic devices. They conducted extensive forensic examinations. They reviewed his financial records. They analyzed surveillance footage, and they examined a lot of digital communications that he had. So the investigation actually lasted almost 7 months before charges were filed. And they arrested him in April 2026, and they charged him with first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse, lewd acts involving a child under 14, and unlawful mutilation of human remains. He pled not guilty to everything. So that doesn't surprise me. But the prosecution alleges that he killed her, Miss Hernandez, after she threatened to expose the relationship. He dismembered the body. He stored the remains. He abandoned it in his Tesla, and he attempted to destroy evidence. The prosecutors say that he did this to protect his music career, which is a major motive, because he was reported, on schedule to earn millions and millions of dollars with all these touring and contracts, music contracts that he had, Jeff.
Yeah, apparently between 2023 and 2025 alone, he earned $10 million.
Yeah.
That's not too bad for a back then 16 to 18-year-old guy. Speaking of, his talent, he apparently had some. Unfortunately, he let that and his personal life get the better of him. But one of his songs, Ray, and me as the linguist and the profiler, and I know you're a bit of both there too. One of his songs actually had the title "Romantic Homicide."
I know.
And it looks like 3 stanzas to it. And I'm going to just read off the lyrics to the last stanza. Believe me, I'm not going to try to sing them, but they go as follows, quote, "In the back of my mind, I killed you, and I didn't even regret it. I can't believe I said it, but it's true. I hate you." End quote. And I did a search on AI, and perhaps AI will be called to the witness stand by the defense. That's a joke, folks, if you know me well enough. But according to AI, at least one of the postings by such, it reads, quote, "Burke has explained that the violent imagery in this song is entirely mental rather than physical." End quote. Okay. We'll see if the prosecution gets the lyrics to this song into the courtroom, and it's certainly when it goes to trial in front of a judge as well as a jury, if it goes that route. But they say sometimes art imitates life, or life imitates art. In this way, you could say life did imitate this art, especially as it's the artist himself that wrote these lyrics, and then whoever he's talking about in this song, nonetheless, Celeste Hernandez wound up very much dead after the fact. And it says, "I didn't even regret it." Well, apparently he went on some kind of a tour the day after she was alleged to have been murdered in April of 25, and some new album, tour of something like that. So did he regret it during that tour? I'd like to look at some videos of him from that day, whatever interviews, and I'd say probably not. mission accomplished. I'm sure he thought that this problem was now has now gone away. Unfortunately, it didn't.
I have to say, Jim, that some of the evidence presented in the preliminary hearing that you discussed this month, July 26, there was limited testimony, but I want to just alert our audience to some of the evidence that was presented, because I think it's kind of overwhelming at this point. Not saying that he's going to be proven that he's guilty, but they found blood traces in his garage. There was blood detected on the mats, tarps, garbage bags, and exercise equipment in his residence. There was blood evidence inside the Tesla. And although this blood evidence, they argued that the testing was just preliminary at this point. So they don't have any conclusivity at this point. But they also, inside the Tesla, they found numerous air fresheners, of course, insect activity, decomposition odors, and body parts stored in the trunk, as you talked about. The digital evidence that they recovered, they did internet searches, purchase histories, electronic communications, and location data. I mean, it's tough to be able to pull away from any of these things. But his lawyers say, and they've maintained this, look, Burke is innocent. The prosecution's forensic evidence is incomplete, and they're correct in that. But they say it's unreliable, and that hasn't been determined yet. The investigators, what they're saying is the investigators are overstating the evidence and what it proves. I think they're just presenting the evidence. The evidence speaks for itself. Defense has just emphasized that, presumptive blood tests are the same as confirmed DNA evidence. We got a question that's coming through here. Can song lyrics actually be used as evidence? If so, can all art and movie paintings be used? What are your thoughts there, Jim?
The simple answer to that is yes. A prosecution will attempt to use, again, song lyrics, movie script, screenwriter elements in a case. The question is whether the judge will permit it. Is it too prejudicial to the case at hand against the defendant? So I have no doubt that the prosecution will try to get these song lyrics in, and I have no defense. There'll be multiple suppression hearings before this trial, if it goes to trial, and they're going to, the defense will fight to keep this type of information out. We'll see, where that goes. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. There's been movies, maybe even songs, in which third parties then acted out something that happened. They had nothing to do with the writing of the movie or acting in it, anything like that. And they've done that. And people can, in fact, use that. I'll never forget in the John Benet Ramsey letter, alleged ransom letter, there were references to at least two movies, possibly three. Number one was the movie Dirty Harry. The first reference. Number two, the other reference was the movie Speed, basically direct quotes out of there. So that's just one other case. And of course, the girl was never kidnapped. She was murdered in her home. But there's at least one other case in that regard. And Ray, just real quick to go back to some of the evidence, Celeste Hernandez's ID card or some sort of identification was found on an LA roadway in January of 26 by a public works person. She wasn't old enough to drive, so it wasn't a driver's license, but I believe it was some sort of a passport or a passport card, because Burke had taken her not only to Texas, but also to London to allegedly meet family. I'm not sure where his family is, but he may have been performing in Texas or London. But somehow, I believe it was some sort of a passport card was found on the road in January of 26. So that has to be explained somehow, too. We'll see whose fingerprints are on that. And I believe even that area was searched extensively where the card was found back in January, thinking maybe that's where her remnants would be, but they were not found there until found in the car a few months later in the LA impoundment lot. So, it was a good question on the part of our audience member. The prosecution, no doubt, will try. A judge will rule whether it's permissible, or I should say admissible, or not.
People really like to hear us talk about, Jim, is some of the behavioral markers that may exist in this. And I'm going to say in a case like this, investigators and behavior analysts would examine the offender's actions before, during, and after the crime. So rather than trying to profile a suspect based on their personality alone, a lot of time behavioral analysts are focused on what the offender's behavior reveals about the planning of the crime, the decision making that they made, the relationships and risk tolerance. What we used to call as behavioral analysis, Jim, when we were on the job, and I think it's still called that. So here's a question that I'm going to touch on some key factors and kind of go back and forth with you. But let's talk about victim selection. The first question they always want to know is, why this victim, Jim?
Well, this obviously wasn't a random victim. This wasn't a stranger. We discussed cases, of course, on Cold
Hmm.
Red, and we've worked cases in IRL, Ray, in which,
Right.
there were stranger victims, unfortunately, wrong place, wrong time. This fits the pattern of homicides. 80 to 85% of homicide victims are known by their killers or known to their killers, however you want to phrase it. So this was, domestic violence, intimate partner assault, homicide. It was statutory rape. I'm not sure exactly how California laws work. If he was 17 and she was, 13, they're both minors then. But I think there's an age discrepancy that can still be charged. So, like, one of the charges is ongoing sexual assault on the part of Burke against Celeste. So that clearly is a factor there. So yeah, all these factors will be looked into, and but victimology will be important. But part of her victimology is being in an intimate relationship, arguably an illegal relationship, strictly because of the age factors with this young man. Whether the parents gave her the kind of freedom to go with him. I mean, look, Elvis Presley was in his 20s when he met up with Priscilla, forget her name before she was married, in Germany when he was in the service. And he went to her parents and asked, hey, could she move back to, I guess it was Memphis, with him after he got out. So older, and I mean Jerry Lee Lewis, another entertainer, he married his 13-year-old cousin when he was like 20, 23, 24. So these kind of things happened before with entertainers, but they didn't wind up chopped up inside the trunk of a car. And as awful as that sounds, so yeah, intimate relationship, murder. They could have been the same age. She could have been older than him. They both could have been adults. The most serious part of the crime, of course, is her murder. But she was also victimized. She was groomed, no doubt, and she became very vulnerable. And of course, at 18, he's not ready to settle down. Sounds like he was having other relationships with women. Celeste got upset, was threatening to expose him, and that's how this all.
Jim, you're so right. Victimology, more often than not, provides the clearest path to identifying what the motive is. You know, you look at the level of planning. And I think investigators want to distinguish between an impulsive killing and a planned homicide, which I believe this is. And indicators of planning include purchasing tools and supplies beforehand, choosing a location where detection is less likely. We don't know where that was. Bringing restraints and weapons, preparing a cleanup plan, arranging transportation, creating an alibi. The greater the planning, the more investigators are going to infer deliberation and forethought. Let's talk about. You want to say something to that, Jim, before we
I
move
just
on?
want to add. I believe the autopsy report showed she was stabbed twice in the abdomen. So that may have been cause of death. And of course, her body was badly decomposed. And even the coroner on the stand at the preliminary hearing said there's only so much they can say in terms of time of death, et cetera. But just so it looks like she may have been stabbed to death, at least that's what the coroner is intimating. And then the body disposal part kicked in hours later or a day or two later. And that's when he bought this equipment, et cetera, this material to carry that out. So valid point there. Just want to throw in, she wasn't necessarily murdered by these tools, the chainsaw, whatever. Probably a quick couple stab wounds. She died. And then he decided, well, I got to get rid of this body because I have a record signing deal I'm doing in the next few days or a tour I'm going on. So I can't have this get in the way. And that's why he's where he is right now.
I agree. You look at some of these offenders, and we've seen this numerous times in IRL, where an offender will dissect a person and dump them somewhere, such as a Tesla, in the front trunk area of the Tesla, it allows them to distance themselves from the crime, you know. But, there's so much behavior. When you look at this, you go, there's, some organization and then some disorganization with this. But when we look, the other thing I want to talk about is method of control, how to gain and use control. And a lot of times, control methods are going to reveal the offender's confidence, which I think was pretty good with this young girl. His experience, which I don't think was as great, and a relationship with the victim, which we know was. But so, the physical force, the threats, restraints. You mentioned the 2 stab wounds to the stomach, which is probably the thing that actually was her demise. But I said before, when you look at the crime scene, Jim, you're looking for distinctions between what's organized and disorganized. He brought the weapons. Whoever did this brought the weapons with him. They removed evidence. They tried to clean the scene. They moved the body from the original kill site, and they thought they avoided leaving forensic evidence, which didn't really happen. Which is, you look at someone that's disorganized, which would be much different.
Yeah, and boy, you wonder at 18 years of age, this was not a criminal mastermind. He may have had some talent in the music front. I'll give him credit for that. Again, not on my playlist. Maybe yours, Ray. I'm not sure. But yeah. But anyway, but not too much forethought went into the planning. I mean, the stabbing may have been impulsive, and I'm not trying to set up a defense here at all for him. Who knows how well that was planned out? Obviously, a knife, a stabbing instrument of some sort, was utilized to inflict the fatal blows. Then, of course, afterwards came the pre-planning, maybe over the course of a few hours, a day or two, of getting the equipment to dispose of the body. So, and the defense will argue all these factors in the long run when the time comes for them. But again, not a criminal mastermind. Lots of mistakes made.
I agree, Jim. One thing that I'm sure our audience wonders about this digital evidence, and usually you think digital evidence. I'm telling you, I wish we had these things when we were playing back in the day, because it's one of the richest resources of behavioral information. You look at internet, GPS location history, text messages, call records, social media activity, financial transactions, cloud backups, all these different things. It helps you build a timeline, Jeff. Allows you to build a timeline. It corroborates and contradicts witness statements. I mean, I think it's great. But one of the things I wanted to throw out to you that you and I always talk about that's really, really important and acts like this is post-offense behavior. What an offender does after the crime can be highly revealing. You and I know that. What are some of the things, Jim, that investigators might look for here?
Well, they've apparently already looked, and they've apparently already found a lot of what this guy was doing. I think I can't imagine being a teenager and having this kind of money, this kind of fame. I'm actually glad that never happened to me, and I mean that very seriously, or my kids or any loved ones. It has to be very difficult without the strictest of parental supervision to keep them in line. And I'm not sure what Burke's familial situation is like. It seems like Celeste had parents who were deeply concerned about her, deeply worried. But go to the gist of your question. I mean, yeah, I have a feeling he just saw Celeste at this point in his life. She was just a gnat that had to be swatted away, that was buzzing around him, causing problems, and he just had to get out of here. And he had to remove her from his orbit. And he did that. He spent the next few hours, day or two, whatever it was. He didn't even go to any elaborate means to dispose of the body. He put it in the trunk of his own car. Did he really think? I guess he just wanted some time bought. Maybe he'd come back and get the car and move it somewhere. Who knows what? I mean, an 18-year-old with a Tesla, I mean, how that in of itself tells you the kind of world this guy in which he was living, the money he was making. So very sloppy on his part. And I think he was just so focused on his career. He no doubt allegedly killed her because she was about to derail his career. All these insinuations, if not direct evidence, of having ongoing sexual relationship with a minor, abortion, whatever, whether you agree with it or not isn't the point, but she was 13 years of age having to make these decisions. I think once she was stabbed, I think the little bit I know about him and the stoic presentment of him in the courtroom from what I've been reading, it's just like, hey, she's out of the way. Now time for me to, follow through on my music career. What other song can I write? Romantic, Get Rid of the Body will be the title of the next song. I don't know. And I don't mean that in a facetious or jocular way, but that's this guy writing about basically killing someone. I know AI says writing it in terms of lyrics of a song about killing someone, and AI says, it's imagery and nothing more. So this guy was very focused. He was me. What can I do for myself, and take it from there.
Someone just came up with a question that said he ordered Uber for her. They had time for her to get away, and then a little bit later, they found her hours away. They have digital on him to the minute. And that's what we talked about, that digital evidence. The availability of that digital evidence, it's hard to get away from any of these things. In most homicide investigation, particularly those involving someone known to the victim, the most valuable behavioral insights come from reconstructing the relationship between the victim and the offender. And the digital evidence helps with that. They examine how the offender's action changed before, during, and after the crime, which is really, really important. What routines that he normally did? Did he change any of those routines? What was his emotional state like? The people around him will see changes in behavior. Look, if this David Burke did this, if he is guilty of this, you're going to see behavior changes in him. He's an 18, 19-year-old kid. You don't do that without it having some sort of emotional impact upon you. You just don't.
Ray, just kind of winding down here, you mentioned a few minutes ago, and you just reinforced the value from an investigative perspective of having social media, text messaging, emails that people write, many times spontaneous. We're not of this generation, Ray, but there are young people, they don't go anywhere without their phone. They jog down the street carrying them, and they'll maybe texting while they're jogging. And Ray, I remember a few cases you and I worked. We may be interviewing a few people together. We would come outside the room and say, boy, if only we could read his mind. Now, that hasn't happened yet. We'll see someday if we have a matrix-like world in which we live, in which police can get a search warrant and put your head in an MRI type machine, and you can actually read the thoughts of the person. But the next closest thing to that is contemporaneous text messaging, especially between a victim and the eventual subject who did that person wrong, killed them, raped them, whatever. And it is really the window to the mind. It's about as close as you're going to get, certainly in the time frame that the crimes were going down. And we talk a lot about post-offense behavior of what they do, where they drive, bury, burn. But to get messages from someone that they're posting, highly emotional, and could be right before or right after the homicide, can tell us a whole lot. And if the law enforcement goes about it the right way with the right search warrants to get that access to that phone, it's open and available for all to see, including a judge and a jury. So no one is reading anyone's mind yet, and I don't think in our lifetime we'll ever see that, Ray. But in many cases, this is about as close as you're going to get when it comes to motivation, when it comes to intention, when it comes to, pre-planning, post-planning, what have you, and just their overall mindset during that time frame. That really tells you a lot. And along with DNA analysis and, genealogical, familial analysis, nowadays, that's great for certain types of crimes. But once you have that suspect, getting access to their records, we saw this a few weeks ago in the preliminary hearing of the Charlie Kirk shooter, all those messages back and forth to his lover boy, and the value contained therein from a prosecutive evidentiary's perspective. So that's a great tool, and it's you and I back in the profiling days, working active cases, we would surmise a lot and come up with the evaluations, but it doesn't get much better, Ray, than having the actual thoughts someone put to paper, I mean, in this case, to a digital screen, moments before, moments after a crime. I mean, it's not a confession per se. The evidence contained therein, you don't have to be a forensic linguist or a profiler to read through it and say, man, this is valuable stuff here. I know there's some of that in this particular case too. And it's also valuable, I'll just close it on this. Even if there, even if there isn't anything evidentiary or conclusive after, say, we know someone is killed, if the person stays off of their text messaging for hours or days, or they're very curt, yes, sir, no, sir, then that tells you something too. And arguably a profiler, a linguist could, render an expert opinion and show you the value of that part of the post offense behavior for 3 years straight. This guy, he never had a day less than, 200 text messages. And all of a sudden, right after this murder, that maybe the body wasn't even found yet and the person goes dead silent, that's a clue too. So it's not just acts of commission when it comes to these types of postings and messaging. It can also be acts of omission.
There's a question that came across a couple times here. Can the parents be held accountable? And I'm going to give you a political answer. And I'm going to say it depends, because we don't really have all the information to be able to make that call. But if they're grossly negligent, then yes, they can be in this. But again, you have a 13-year-old child. I mean, this child is seeing this guy when she's 11 years old, which I can't imagine having my daughter's 11 years old thinking about anything other than playing with their dolls. I mean, kids are growing up so quick today. So it's a great question. I don't think we have enough information to be able to give an honest answer to that. But I'm going to touch on one other thing, Jim, that you mentioned about the lyrics of this individual that are somewhat telling, and can they be used against him? I've seen, and I know you have too, and one of the artists is Taylor Swift. In many of her songs, she writes up about past breakups with boyfriends and people in her life. A lot of country singers, if you listen to the lyrics, it's always about something that's going on in their life. And a lot of these lyrics, am I saying that that is what's happening here? I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that there's a track record to see where these things, where people, recording artists, talk about their lives in their music. Just saying, Jen.
Yeah, and it's another reflection of their soul, their mindset, their thought processes. Again, in and of itself, probably not presentable for probable cause to get an arrest warrant for someone. Although, if the lyrics were a lot more specific and followed exactly a set of plans that eventually an MO and behavior that was carried through in a homicide, and maybe the song had never been publicized before, that could be a sort of like a map to how a homicide was committed. So I have a feeling this will be lyrics to this song will spend the better part of a day in court being argued back and forth. The morning, the prosecutor trying to get them in for the trial, and the afternoon, the defense arguing against it. And then who knows how long the judge will take to decide. But they'd be very valuable, I think, in front of a jury in terms of potential motivation on the part of D4VD, aka David.
Jim, I'd like to move on to some questions here as we wrap this thing up. We got about 4 or 5 questions. We'll see how many we can get to. The first question is, given that the body sat in the impounded Tesla for over 4 months, what does that tell us about Burke? Was he even attempting to conceal his crime? I think the fact that her body allegedly remained inside an impounded vehicle for months is really unusual, but by itself doesn't establish what Burke was thinking or intending. I think the investigators and jurors in this case are instead going to look at the totality of the evidence that's there, including whether there were efforts to hide the vehicle, alter evidence, mislead investigators, or distance himself from the crime, Jeff.
Yeah, I'll just give a quick answer here. To me, from a behavioral point of view, it also shows you his lack of empathy, his lack of caring for his girlfriend. And that's what she was, however he defined her, whatever. That he could just dispose of her, not even have her body found somewhere. I don't know how she got there, and let the family give her a proper burial. Instead, if he just disposed of her in a very uncaring, unsympathetic way, which probably tells us a whole lot about this guy.
I think too that the defense here in this case is going to argue that there was real no sophisticated effort to hide the body here. They said I think they're going to say ultimately the intent to conceal has got to be inferred from all the surrounding evidence, not just simply where the body was found.
That'll be their argument. Let's see what the jury thinks.
All right, the second question. The prosecution mentioned that two of Celeste's fingers were missing, specifically the one bearing a red tattoo of the name David. From a linguistic and symbolic profile, is this an attempt to erase identity or explicit evidence destruction? What do you think, Jim?
Once again, one doesn't have to be a profiler or a linguist to give any sort of assessment to this. Of course, he somehow thought she wouldn't be identified being found in a Tesla that is registered to him. So again, this guy is not high on the Mensa list to get into that particular august group. Yeah, so he thought because he would somehow delay identification of her by removing those fingers with his own name tattooed on it was some kind of a clever ploy on his part. But once again, it just shows, through dental records or there's a missing person in Burke's life. They're not going to get dental records and look at other evidence, DNA, to determine who's in there. So again, you talked about lack of organization and sophistication. I think she was just such a bother to him at the end. He had so much else professionally going on in his life and perhaps personally. He just said, she's so now insignificant to me. I'm just going to get rid of her, cut off the fingers. She's get any trace to me with this woman. He did it with the abortion. He convinced her to get rid of the baby growing inside her. And now, get rid of the fingers, which would be further proof or certainly evidence of his connection to her. So it says a lot, quite frankly, in its disorganized simplicity of trying to somehow protect himself from being connected with her and not seeing the big picture, which he's apparently not smart enough to have seen.
No, I agree with you, Jim. I agree. I don't think there's any more needs to be said on that. Next question. With special circumstances like lying in wait, financial gain, and witness silencing being followed by the DA, how will the timeline of Celeste's threats to expose him play out in front of the jury? I think if the prosecution alleged that Celeste intended to expose Burke or reveal damaging information about him, that could become central to establishing what his motive was and the premeditation of him. I think jurors are likely be asked to examine questions such as why did the alleged threats or discussions occur? How did Burke reportedly respond to those that when those threats were made? Did his behavior change afterward? And that'll come from his family and friends around him. Were there financial pressures or incentives that were going on at the same time? Did communications such as the digital evidence, witness testimony, surveillance show planning before the homicide? I think ultimately jurors tend to find timelines kind of persuasive, at least when they're supported by objective evidence such as text messages and phone records, GPS status, things of that nature. So I think that those types of things in witness testimony could be kind of damaging to somebody.
Yeah, and just real quick here, special circumstances, most states have them. They're defined slightly differently state to state, and it really comes into play during sentencing. And while California still has a death penalty on the books, their governor, Gavin Newsom, said there will be no more death penalties while I'm governor. So the whole special circumstances thing, the prosecution will argue for it. They're going to do their best to get the highest and most severe sentence they can. Again, assuming this goes to trial and assuming he's convicted by a jury of his peers. And but that's really where special circumstances come in. I mean, it could be the crimes themselves, but certainly the sentencing down the line is where special circumstances usually play a role.
I agree, Jim. Question 4, and there's one more after this. When a musician writes themes like romantic homicide before a crime occurs, how do you separate artistic expression and shock value marketing from genuine criminal behavior? And like we said before, a lot of artists write songs about violence, death, but they never commit a crime of violence. Throughout music and literature, film, we have all these fictional depictions of homicide or violence. They're common and they stand alone, but they really I think, in my estimation, have very little predictive value on future criminal behavior, Jim.
Yeah, and we could spend a whole episode on this. I mean, Eric Clapton with Derek and the Dominoes sang "I shot the sheriff, but I did not kill the deputy," which was actually, I think, a Jamaican song that he covered, in the early 70s. So a lot of singers will put music out there like that. It doesn't mean they actually will carry through on the crimes themselves. And look, I can't allege that when Burke wrote Romantic Homicide, he was already thinking of killing someone, be it Celeste or someone else, but it certainly shows, and it can be argued in front of a jury, a predisposition to violence, to anger management, and to problem resolution that, hey, you're in my way, I killed you, and I didn't even regret it. And I'm quoting the song lyrics now. But it's true, I hate you, end quote. So you mentioned Taylor Swift and other songwriters out there. Of course, just like authors, they play off of their real life experience. Who knows who Burke was singing about at this point in time when he was writing these lyrics, but it was considered his breakthrough song. And a lot of people downloaded his album or the song itself and made him a rich man. I'm not sure what that money's going to do for him right now, being held in LA County Jail awaiting this trial.
Jim, I agree. I think investigators are going to place much greater weight on observable actions, planning, communication, and forensic evidence, and the victim-offender dynamics, rather than songs, poems, and other artistic works. Those are in isolation. Someone just asked a question: what would be the best evidence to argue against all this evidence? I'm not going to play into that one, Jim. I don't even know.
Well, they're going to attack. They'll attack the legality of its acquisition. That's what they always do. There was the warrant, but was a dot, was a period, or a comma placed here, a dot over the I or a cross over the T, and they're going to work on that. So that's what defense attorneys do, and when the judge will decide what's admissible, what's not.
All right, our last question comes from Cynthia, a behavior analyst would avoid attributing a single psychological motive without corroborating evidence. If the allegation is that an offender left critical evidence in a vehicle associated with them, several competing explanations are possible, and investigators would evaluate each against the available facts rather than assuming one is correct. It's a pretty heavy question.
I'm not sure it's a question more than a statement.
I don't think it's more of a statement. I think I agree with you.
Of course. I mean, every profilers have to rely on evidence, all the evidence that's present at the time of a crime or a crime scene when it's been detected. And we don't always have that advantage. Sometimes just looking at the missing person case and you don't have, and you have to still render a profile or criminal investigative analysis of some sort. So, but all the evidence is looked at all the time. And usually, and if some people see me in the early days of Nancy Guthrie case, when I would do these media hits, I would say, hey, it's one of these 2 to 3 things: kidnapping for money, abduction in her case, and, or something very personal to the family. And I said, that's what we as profilers would try to do. And our agents or law enforcement would come to Quantico, and Ray, you've been there dozens of times back in the day, and say, it's one of these 3. We'll prioritize this one and say, this is where you should focus your personnel, your time, and your efforts at this point. If that gets ruled out, then go to step 2 here. So, I mean, you can try to break this case down of why he put her in a trunk instead of burying her, in the ground in a shallow grave, in a car that could identify to him. Who knows what they're going to pull out the defense? That it was one of his cronies and one of his
let me give you 3, Jim.
roadies, or what did it?
Let me give you one of 3. What about panic? What if he just panicked? What about he had a distorted sense of control or overconfidence? We'll never think I would do something like this. Or what if he just had a cognitive overload? He's got all these multiple issues going on at the same time, and he just didn't, he just moving, so it could be any one of those things, but it could be all of those things too.
Yeah. And it's the job of a defense team at time of trial to obfuscate facts and evidence and float out other potential theories. And that's what they're going to try to do. And the jury eventually will have to decide if they can see through these trial balloons, if you will, that the defense puts out, or says, nah, this case is pretty cut and dry. No,
we'll keep track.
No pun intended there.
We'll watch this kind of closely, and we'll give our opinion from time to time as things move forward in this. But for right now, I think we've given a pretty good rendition of what's going on since this thing has taken place here. I want to say one thing about the Lindsay Buziak case before we move on. It just seems that there's been a lot of people that have been reaching out to us since we completed our season 10 a week ago. And I want to tell you that we're going to post a video on our website. I want you to review that video and tell us what you think. And when you do that, in a couple weeks, Jim and I will come back and give you a behavioral autopsy of what we see in that video. And it's a video that was on a true crime network where several individuals, including the father, the sister, and the police, were interviewed. And that was sent to us by a fan. So I just want to let everybody know that.
And that you can find it on www.coldredpodcast.com, our website, our you put your blog posting. So everyone, thanks again for listening, whether live or later, to this episode of Cold Red. Please like us, subscribe to us, and give us some positive feedback when you get the chance, or negative, and we'll do our best to address the issues you bring up. So again, keep safe out there, watch what's behind you and in front of you, and we will see you next time on Cold Red.